Hello everybody and welcome back to another My Porch Prints tutorials. This is Kyra and today I'm going to be showing you the first part in our two-part series on how I made this very vintage junk journal. And we're calling it that because it's made with our new very vintage junk journal kit collection. And I will have links to all of the kits and supplies used in these tutorials down in the description box below. And that's also going to include the freebie that is available in today's video. The freebie is part of our binding that we're going to be doing. So this is going to be a tie-in binding method for this journal. And this video is going to show you how to make the cover base, the binding, and the signatures. And then the next video is going to show you how I decorated the inside. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video. And I'm also going to make a playlist to make things a little bit easier, which will have all of the videos in it, including some of the tutorials for various projects that I'll be using in this journal. You might recognize a few of them if you've been around. You might notice some of the tags I've used and things like that. So all of those tutorials will be in a playlist down in the description box, along with links to our socials like Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram. All right, so without much further ado, let's jump right in with supplies. So obviously you're going to need the very vintage papers and pages kit. I went ahead and printed out all of those pages and I flipped them around and ran them through the printer, printing on the back of them as well. And then I also did print out the very vintage ephemera kit. Now most of this will come into play later in the second video with decorating. However, a couple of these pieces might sneak their way into the cover. So, you know, it's nice just to have options. And I printed my pages on just regular printer paper. However, some of the ephemera is printed on cardstock, and most of the pieces will tell you whether or not you should be printing on cardstock or paper. So just make sure to double check those instructions. And it's also up to you if you want to print on the back of some of these ephemera pieces. I did by just flipping them over, running them through the printer, and using some of the pretty papers from the very vintage kit just on the back of several pieces like envelopes and some of the like cards and faded photos and things like that. Of course, that's optional though. It's just up to you and how you want your journal to look. And I did only end up using like half of the items in this kit because it's a very large kit and has lots of pieces, and still ended up with a really full journal. So you should kind of have your choice of items to use. Now, a majority of the project will be using the very vintage collection. However, I am going to be supplementing a little bit with a couple of different projects, and one of the main ones will be these industrial treasure tags, and my mother actually did a video showing how to assemble these, so again that will be in the playlist linked down below. And then I'm also going to be taking some of the various little fussy cuts that came with that kit and be using this to decorate just a little bit here and there on some of the covers and pages in my journal. Again, you don't have to use these pieces, but if you happen to make these tags, you'll have these pieces available, and it's just kind of nice and handy. The other item that I'll be using for some of my decorating is going to be these little button bee embellishments, and it did come with this freebie for these little honeycomb stencils. So again, that video will be linked down below if you want to make some of these projects and then come back to this video. Alright, so now that we have the supplies out of the way, let's go ahead and kind of begin here. So when deciding the size of your journal, it's going to be kind of important to pick out the buttons you want to use for the spine. Since I'm doing kind of like a cute little decorative button pattern on my spine here, I need to try to find buttons, one, that kind of match my kit, and since this is a neutral kit, that's pretty easy to do. And then I'm going to be using a variety of sizes for my buttons, but again, you want to keep in mind that if your spine is too thin, your buttons are not going to fit on the spine. So this is kind of an extreme example here, but you see what I mean. Like, you really have to sort of plan out which buttons you're using. So I'm going to be doing a 3 signature journal here. So I'm going to kind of take my buttons and arrange them in 3 lines. And this kind of gives me an idea of the spacing of my buttons here. I don't want them, you know, to be touching each other or overlapping. They need to have their space here. So this kind of helps me figure out exactly which spine to use. So for our base, I'm going to be using a cereal box for mine, but I'll also be showing you how to use like chipboard or cardboard if you have to cut your own spine. So I'll be showing both methods. The only difference is that chipboard is a little bit thicker to work with. All right, and you can see here I went ahead and grabbed one of these cereal boxes and I'm trying to see, is it gonna fit my buttons? And the answer is no. This is a 2-inch spine on this cereal box and it's just a little too small. So I grabbed this other box I have, and this is a 3-inch spine, and that's going to be just right for the size of the buttons I'm using. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this Reese's box, and that should give me the proper size for my spine. However, if you're not using a cereal box, you can also take a piece of cardboard or chipboard and just measure out the size of the spine you need. That works too. The reason I like the cereal box is it's already connected. So what I'm going to do is find the seam of the box, and I'm going to open the box up at the top, the bottom, and the side, just like this, by carefully sort of opening up that seam with my fingers. You could also use like an X-Acto knife or something like that if you want to. And you can see it's got kind of the layout of a book already, with a spine and covers. So for my cover, I usually go 5.5 by 8.5 inches. And I usually use a piece of chipboard that's already pre-cut to that size to kind of do my measurements. But if you don't have that, you can also just use a ruler and measure out your covers that way. So it's kind of up to you. I do like to have a template piece, so that just makes things easier because I struggle with measurements. Even when I understand what I should be doing, I always somehow get it wrong. So having the template just makes things a little bit easier for me. So taking my template here, I'm going to line it up in the corner using kind of this top seam as a guide for the top of the cover, and then lining it up against my quote-unquote spine of my journal, which is also the spine of the box. And then I'm just going to trace out my cover from there. So doing that on both the left and right side of the spine, again, just lining things up with the seams to keep things nice and straight, and then tracing around my 5.5 by 8.5 inch cover. And then I'm going to connect them at the bottom just with a straight line like this. And that's going to give us our general shape of our book. So we've got the front and back cover and the spine, and they're already connected, so that saves us a little bit of work. And you can see here, once I've cut that out, we've got a nice base to work with. Now, if you don't have a cereal box and you just have random pieces of cardboard or chipboard to use, what you're going to have to do is cut out your 5.5 and 8.5 inch covers separately, as well as your spine. And then taking 2 pieces of just regular computer, you know, like printing paper, just regular paper, we're going to overlap them by about 1 inch. It doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of eyeball it. And we're going to add some glue and glue them together just like this, trying to get things as straight as possible. And then let that dry, and we're going to glue our cardboard or chipboard pieces down on top of it. So starting with your spine, and then your 2 covers glued right next to it. And again, try to keep things kind of straight. I'm going a little quick here because this is just an example for you guys. But we're going to glue our covers down, leaving about 1/4 inch of space between the spine and the cover. You don't want much more than that, otherwise your covers might tear a little, and if they're too close, then it's going to be really hard to fold the covers closed. So about 1/4 inch or so is all you'll need. And then we should have like this 1 inch border around the outside of the cardboard, and we're just going to take the corners of that border and we're going to fold them in and glue them down just like this. So do it to all 4 corners. And then we can take the edges in between those corners, and we're also going to glue and fold those down. And what this does is the paper is going to hold our covers and our spine together, and this is going to create that sort of base for the book. So it's just one extra step versus a cereal box, but you get exactly the same result here with the 2 covers and a spine. So go ahead and pick whichever method works for you. Again, I'm going to be using the cereal box for today's video just to make things easy on myself, and it's got the 3-inch spine that I need. So from here, I am going to be covering the inside cover of my journal. So I'm just taking 2 decorative pieces of paper from the very, very vintage Papers and Pages kit, and I'm printing them out vertically. You will need the vertical papers for this in particular, and you're going to print the same one twice, and it only needs to be printed on one side. And we're going to, again, overlap them in the center, just like this, and glue them down by about 1 inch of overlap. Try to get things kind of straight here so that they line up nicely. And then we're going to take our journal and we're going to cover the inside. So I ended up inverting my cover for reasons I'm not going to get into, but just so you're not confused, we are covering the inside of the journal, not the outside. And also ignore the paint. The paint was, I had a brain moment where my brain stopped working and I thought I needed to cover the edges with paint before putting the paper on. I did not need to do that. So just ignore the paint, ignore the paint. And we're going to take the corners of our paper after we've glued our cover down inside facing down. We're going to take the corners and glue those down as well. I like to pre-fold my corners. I think it makes it just a little bit easier. And then once we've folded all of our corners in and glued them down, we're going to fold all of the edges and glue those down as well. So just folding them over the edge of the book like this and gluing them down. And don't worry if things look a little bit ugly, we're going to be covering this up anyway. This is just to kind of hide our borders and give the inside covers a little bit of decoration here. So I'm going to kind of crease along the spine, and I usually do get a little bit of gusseting or wrinkling that's happening on the inside paper here, but usually that gets kind of hidden by decorating anyway, so don't worry too much if that happens to you. All right, so now that we have the inside covers covered and our edges kind of covered as well, we can start the decorating process for the front of the journal. So you can use whichever papers you want to cover the front of your journal. I'm going to be using these 2. I wanted a lighter paper and a darker paper that would have some contrast with each other so that the spine was a different color than the front and back covers. And I had this piece here that got kind of messed up in the printer, so I decided to use this for the spine. You want to make sure that when you cut this piece, it's wider than the spine itself. That's going to make kind of like a seamless cover for the spine. And my piece is printed horizontally, so it doesn't actually reach the top of my book. It's gonna leave a little bit of a border, but I don't mind the way that looks. But if you want to fully cover the front cover, you'll want to use a vertical piece instead of a horizontal piece. So it's kind of just up to you. I'm gonna go ahead and leave mine horizontally. So I'm going to just glue this piece down over the outside, of my journal cover to cover the spine. And then I'm going to take this darker paper here to contrast with it, and I'm going to fold it in half. And again, this is a horizontal printed sheet, and that way it lines up nicely with my spine. So I'm just going to cut it in half and then glue either half down to the front and back cover. And you want to make sure to kind of check where your spine fold is. So I like to kind of close my covers here and then lay the piece down so that I can get it lined up right against the edge of the spine. And before I glue these down, this is optional, but if you want to, you can create a tie for your journal to close it. So I'm taking this really long piece of sort of frayed ribbon that I have here, and I just want to make sure that the pieces are longer than my journal itself. I like really long pieces so I can make really messy looking bows. So I'm going to cut those, as well as a couple pieces of string that I'm cutting to the same length here, just to add some more variation to the tie-in, again, just making it a little bit more detailed. So once I have 3 pieces of ribbon or string for either side of my book, we can go ahead and glue those down. So I'm going to take these strings and this ribbon here, and these strings and this ribbon on this side. And I'm going to take my first kind of cluster here and glue the ends down. So I'm using Fabri-Tac. You could use maybe something like hot glue. You just want to make sure that it's not too thick and that you don't burn yourself, obviously. I like using Fabri-Tac. It works really well for fabrics, paper, and metal. So that's going to be kind of my glue of choice. And we do have it linked in our Amazon shop if you are interested. And I even busted out the hairdryer here to dry things just a little bit quicker so I could move along with my cover. So once that's fairly dry, I'm going to add some glue to the back of my cover panel here. And you want to get as close to the edges as possible because we don't want them lifting. And then I'm going to glue that in place right on top of my ribbon. And again, this is why I want to keep my glue kind of thin, because we don't want to create like a giant bubble under the cover. So just double checking that everything is lining up nicely and then gluing that panel down, and that's going to help hold those strings, those ribbons in place. And once everything's dry, it should be holding pretty solid. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process for the back cover here. Same thing. Gluing my panel down over my ribbons, and I want to try to make sure that my ribbons are equal or like even with each other. So you can use a ruler if you want to make sure that they are, you know, lined up with one another so that one's not too high or too low and that they meet kind of in the center. And here's what that looks like when that's done. So let's go ahead and actually start decorating here. So I'm taking some blank pages from the Pages and Papers kit, and I'm going to cut those in half and use those as kind of second panels on my front and back cover. I did trim them down a little bit so that you could still see that dark black border underneath. And then I'm going to just start by layering little decorative elements on the cover. I like to lay things out before I commit to gluing them down. So I am taking some of those industrial, what are they called? The treasure tags, and those are really handy. They did a lot of the heavy lifting for me in terms of decorating. Since those were already kind of done, I just had to decorate around them. So I'm just using, you know, some little ribbon pieces, the lace appliques, buttons, fussy cuts, and just kind of arranging things until I'm happy with them. And then, you know, once I'm made up my mind about what I want to use and have finished my little collage here, I can glue everything down. Now, this did take me a little bit of time because I kept changing my mind on what I wanted things to look like, but eventually I did kind of settle on this as my design. So feel free to pause the video here and take a closer look if you want, but of course, you can also just do whatever you want to do, use whatever you have on hand and just decorate until you like the look of your cover. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. All right, so that is going to finish up the cover decorating. So we can go ahead and move on to our signatures. So for the signatures, you're going to need some paper, and I printed mine front and back with pages from the very, very vintage journal pages kit. So I went ahead and printed all of them out, and I am going to be taking a Tim Holtz distresser here, which just has these little blades inside of it that you can use to kind of rough up your pages. But if you don't have this tool and you don't want to pick it up from our Amazon shop, you can also use scissors and run the blade of the scissors over the page. Just be careful with this that you don't accidentally close the scissors and cut yourself. But if you're very careful with this, you can still get a very similar result. And again, this isn't necessary for any reason. It just adds a little bit of extra detail. With junk journals, a lot of the times the little details kind of add up to make the whole thing feel like really finished. And this is one of the easiest ways to add a little bit of distressing to your papers. So you can see here, this is kind of what it looks like once I've distressed the whole stack. And now we can start by dividing them into the 3 signatures for our journal. So if you're new to journal making and you don't know what a signature is, it's essentially just a stack of papers that goes into your journal. So I'm going to do 3 signatures like I talked about earlier. So 3 piles of papers. So just divvying things up. They don't have to be perfectly equal. Typically, my journals have about 4 or 5 signatures with about 6 sheets of paper per signature when I make my journals. But since the buttons are kind of restricting me to 3 signatures, I decided to bulk my signatures up a little bit and use about 8 sheets per signature. I wouldn't go much higher than that because they can get really thick and it's just a little awkward. So once I'm happy with the order of my pages, feel free to add more papers if you want to. I'm going to be supplementing with a few of these coffee dyed papers. So just tucking them into my signatures here, kind of wherever I think they'll look nice, just kind of spreading them out. And these coffee dyed papers are a little bit larger than my papers, so it also creates a little bit of variation in the size of the pages, which I personally like. Feel free to trim things down to all be the same size if you want to. And then I'm also going to be adding some coffee dyed paper doilies to mine. You don't have to use just, square pieces of paper. You can add different shaped items into your journal. However, make sure if you do coffee dyed doilies, you spill the coffee on the kitchen floor. That is a very important step in this artistic process. Jokes aside, I do actually have a tutorial on how to make coffee dyed doilies, so I will link that down below if you are interested. And then once I toss those into my signatures here, just kind of finding somewhere in the center and kind of generally centering them in the, whole signature itself, I can go ahead and pick up my entire pile here and fold it in half. And this is going to be the final step in the making of the signatures before we actually add them into the journal. So go ahead and fold all 3 signatures in half and set them aside. And now we're going to return our attention back to the spine of our journal. So for this project, we do have this freebie template that we made to help you guys keep your signatures nice and orderly. This comes in a 3-inch and 2-inch spine. So if you have a 3-inch or 2-inch spine, you can use these to help you keep your signatures straight. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the 3-inch one since that's what I'm using for my journal. And I'm going to punch out all of these holes that are marked at the top and bottom of the template, just like this. And then we're going to center this on the outside of our spine. I am using some clips to help hold it in place so it doesn't slide around. And you can see that my template is just a little bit bigger than my spine. That's not a problem so long as it's not like way off center. So try to keep your spine somewhat centered with the template here. You don't want it too far to the left or right. And then once you're close, you can go ahead and clip it in place. I'm using these little bulldog clips. And then I am taking a marker here and marking the inside of those holes that we punched. So just kind of marking them down on the spine. And now that I have a guide, I can punch these out. And you can use like a hand punch like this one here, but depending on your cardboard or chipboard, it might be a little difficult if it's really thick. So I like using the crocodile. This has a punch built into it and kind of distributes the pressure so that it's not so hard to use. And this is linked in our Amazon shop, so feel free to check that out in the description box if you want to pick one of these up. And then of course we're going to need some eyelets for those holes we punched. Now I went probably too overboard with this, but I didn't like the way the silver looked. So I'm actually going to be punching some holes in a paper plate I have, and I'm going to be popping my little eyelets into the hole here. And I'm going to be spray painting them with black spray paint. And this didn't take very long, it was just a couple of minutes, but I think it makes them look a little bit older. And to kind of take it to the next step, I'm taking a little bit of brown and gold acrylic paint and just kind of dry brushing it over the top of my eyelets, just to make them look, again, a little bit more antique, a little bit older here. And I did spray them with some Mod Podge, like spray, to hopefully keep the paint from scratching. I honestly don't think it did anything, but I wanted to try it. So when I used the Eyelet press, it did scratch just a little bit of paint off, but I think it still looks good. In fact, maybe I like it even more. So again, you don't have to do this extra process. If you have silver eyelets, just use what you have. But if you want to, you can paint your eyelets and make them look a little bit older if you want. All right, so next we need to measure out some string. So I like to go about 3 times the length of my spine, just making sure that I have plenty of thread. I'd rather have too much than too little. And taking one end here, we're gonna go from the outside of our journal cover to the inside through the top eyelet here on the far right. And then we want to take our 2 ends of our string and pull them so that they are equal lengths. And with this top string here, I'm just gonna kind of toss it out of the way. And I like to take a clip and clip it down to the cover so that I don't accidentally pull the string out while I'm threading my beads on. So at this point, we're gonna take the other end of our string, and you can see I've already kind of arranged my buttons in the 3 signatures in the order that I want them to be used in. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my first button here, and we're gonna thread it onto the string, just starting from the back and going to the front, just like this through the first hole. And then we're going to tug the button along the string until it's kind of in the area we want it to lay. And of course you can just overload your string with lots of buttons if you want, as many as it will hold. I wanted mine to have a little bit of space between them and kind of create almost like a little pattern kind of going on. So I'm kind of eyeballing where I want things to be here, trying to keep things evenly spaced. And you can slide the button a little bit along the string, so don't worry if it's not like perfectly in the right place. You can adjust them a little bit as needed as you go. And then once I'm happy with where it's placed, then I'm going to thread the string through the other hole in the front of my button and just pull it through here, trying to be careful not to catch the string on things, until it is tight, just like this. And again, you can kind of slide the button along the string so that it sits where you like it, just like that. And the only difference with a button that has 4 holes is you just want to remember to go to the opposite hole, like this, not the one that's like beside it. I hope that makes sense. It's not a big deal. You can always pull it off the string and rethread it, but it will sit a little awkwardly if you don't do it that way. So we're going to try to find the button that's, you know, directly across from the hole you thread it through. I hope that makes sense. You'll figure it out. It's not too difficult, but I wanted to mention it because I did that a couple of times and was really irritated when I have to take the button back off the string and redo it again. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of continue that process of adding my buttons onto my string until they kind of lie where I want them to be. And then once you're done with all your buttons, you can take that end of that string, and again, going from the front cover to the inside here, just kind of tug it through the eyelet, just like this. And then I am going to use a clip to hold that string in place so that it's not sliding around when I flip my whole book over. Just like this. And that just kind of keeps the buttons from flying out of place while turning your book around. And then at this point, we're going to grab our first signature, whichever one you like best and want to be the first one that goes in the book. And we're going to open it up to the center of the spread like this. And I did use some clips to keep my pages from sliding around. And there are kind of 2 different methods here that you can use. So the first one is to just take these strings. I did remove the clips here, and then I'm just taking both ends of the string and just tying my signature in. And this is how I usually do it. However, I don't know exactly what the issue is here, but I was having a lot of sliding around of my signature. Maybe I just didn't have enough pages. I'm not sure exactly what it was. Maybe it was just a weak day and I just couldn't get it tied tight enough. But to kind of solve this issue, I'm going to do an extra step here. So taking a sharp object like a needle or an awl like this one from a bookbinding kit, we're going to be putting some holes in our signature. So to kind of figure out where to put the holes, I'm just kind of lining the spine of my signature up with those 2 eyelets that I punched in my spine of my journal cover. And I'm going to mark on the spine of my signature right kind of where those holes are so that they line up just like this. So I just used a Sharpie here. And now I can take my awl and punch my holes out. So I'm gonna open up my signature like this, find those marks on the spine, and then going from the outside to the inside, I'm just punching that little hole in the spine. So I'm gonna do that to the top and to the bottom. We're going clear through the signature with this hole. So go ahead and do that here. And I'm trying to kind of show you guys what it looks like on camera, which is creating kind of an awkward angle. So I ended up kind of bending my pages a little bit, but you kind of get the idea here. You're just punching the hole straight through the signature. And keep in mind that the more pages in your signature, the thicker they will be, so the harder this process will be. So again, another reason to not make your signatures super thick. Once you have those holes poked through though, you can go ahead and thread your string through. So I am going to make sure that my signature is right side up. I have put signatures in my journal upside down before, so I'm trying to save you that pain. So I'm gonna go ahead and use a needle to help make things a little bit easier here. I'm gonna thread my thread through the needle and then pull it from the back of the signature to the front, or from the outside to the inside, however you want to think of that. So I'm just going to tug it through. I used a bit of a thicker needle, so mine was a little bit harder. A smaller needle and a little bit of thinner thread probably would have made this a little bit easier. But we're already here, so I'm gonna go ahead and tug that string through that top hole here. And then I'm going to remove the needle and do the same thing at the bottom. So grabbing the bottom thread, going to go from the back to the front, or the outside to the inside, and just tug that string through. And this is going to keep our signatures aligned with the eyelets so that it's not sliding around so much. This is a much more stable way of doing this. It is an extra step, but it really makes the journal pages a lot more secure in the cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And now that I have the two ends, we can return back to that first method and just tie these two ends in a knot. And you can tie the knot at the top of the page or in the center, at the bottom. It's kind of up to you. I'm gonna go ahead and tie mine in the center here. And I have a lot of extra string, so you can use this to create like a little bow, or create like a little bookmark, which I'm going to do in my center signature, and I'll show you that in a little bit. You could also add like beads or charms to these strings if you want to, or you can just take some scissors and cut them off, which is what I ended up doing for my front and back signature. And then I'm just gonna keep that extra thread and use it to create like little bows on my tags and things like that. So this is kind of what that signature looks like once you've got it already tied in. So we're gonna repeat that process for the last two signatures. So the exact same process. The only difference for me was I did use a different string for my center signature just for aesthetic fun. And then I did cut this string to be really long, and you can tie it again at the top of the journal if you want, but since the string was so long, I decided to tie it in the center here. And I'm gonna use this extra string to create like a little button bookmark. So with these extra threads, I'm going to add some buttons onto them. So I've already done one here, this little black button on the shorter piece of thread here. And I'm gonna now use a white button on the longer piece, and I'll kind of show you how I did that. It's really simple. So taking a button that has 4 holes in it, we're going to string it from the back to the front of the button, just like this. And I'm kind of sliding it along the string, kind of figuring out where I like the look of it. Do I like it shorter or longer? And once I'm happy with the length, I'm going to kind of hold it in place. And I'm going to take the string and going from the front to the back on the opposite hole on the other side of the button, I'm going to pull it through just like this, creating this line. And then we're gonna flip it over, and on the back, we're gonna find one of those other holes and loop it from the back to the front, like this. And then we're gonna go from the front to the back with the last hole here, and that makes a little cute little cross section in the button, really easy like this. And then on the back of the button, Again, just making sure I like where it is before I tie it off and finish it. I'm going to tie a knot, and I like to do like 2 or 3 knots here so that the button doesn't accidentally slide off, so that's what I'm gonna do. And then I will just cut the remaining thread off. All right, and now these can be used as little bookmarks in your journal. You can just kind of toss them in between your pages, or they can hang on the outside of the journal and look kind of cute that way. Now the last thing I'm going to do here is curve my spine. Now this is optional. If you like a flat spine, just leave it as is. But if you want to, you can find the space between your signatures and just kind of curve and bend the spine of your journal. And that's gonna curve it and make it look, in my opinion, a little bit more like traditional book-like. So I like curved spines. If you have a thick chipboard, this might be a little bit harder to do. You'll need a little more pressure, but otherwise it's not too difficult, and I feel like it really kind of completes the book. Now, something else you might take note of is there's a lot of space between the signatures when you only have 3 of them. So if you want to, you can take an extra page, like an extra piece of paper, and you can print it out and add glue to the front and back halves of it and glue it in between those signatures, and that kind of hides that space a little bit and makes it maybe flow a little bit better and look a little bit nicer. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that. I didn't for my journal, since I'm going to be filling it with lots of decorating in the next tutorial, which is coming out. So again, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on that video. But otherwise, this is the base cover for our very, very vintage journal. I hope that you had fun crafting along with me, maybe got some new ideas, some new inspiration to try in your own journal, and I would love to hear about how it turns out. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye!